Daniel Daly here. This is a video on the Daly family. The Daly family. Pretty much sons and daughters of Peter Paul Daly and Mary Ann Daly, near McLean, my grandfather. Pretty much his children. Okay. Now I've already talked about Kevin and Pat a fair bit, and I've extensively written on my father Cyril in it's in the Rainbow Bible, where there's a lot of information on Dad there. And I've written on Kevin and Pat Daly. One other anecdote about Kevin and Pat, which is not in the videos, was that once they stayed at a hotel in Narrabundah in Canberra, and we visited them, and Matthew, my older brother, vomited in the pool where they were staying. It's the hotel next to the golf course, and the golf course had a giant red golf ball on a pole. Anyway, that's just another anecdote where they stayed once. Anyway, Peter Daly. First of all, Peter Daly. He's not the oldest. The oldest is Vincent, but I won't really... Yeah, Vincent's the oldest of the boys. Molly's the oldest of the children, Molly the girl. And Philomena is the youngest. She's a girl as well, of course. It's girl, 9 boys, girl, but I won't worry about the orders particularly much. Peter, I'll talk about Peter. Peter was the son of Peter Paul Daly and Mary Ann Daly, near McLean. He served in World War II as a cook. Peter kept family records where we got information from. When I knew him, he lived in a 2-story house adjoining a row of houses all connected together in Paddington in Sydney. Peter was fond of marching music, and he put some on for us once when we were staying there. Me and Greg were listening to it, and I recall, this is great, because I was pretty much, I was thinking like that as not exactly my style of music, because I was used, probably by then I think I was listening to Bon Jovi and things like that, and it wasn't exactly the coolest of music to me, but I suppose I humoured him. But he was old style, he's born back in the beginning of the 20th century, so not really much of an issue, but he liked his marching music. And he owned a big wooden chairs with leather vinyl cushioned sort of seats of the older style, which sat around his table in the central living room of his house. He had a TV set, and I remember watching a one-day international cricket match between Australia and England one evening at his house. It was actually the match where Alan Lamb made, I think, 18 runs or something off the last over to win the match for England, but the TV cut out when they never showed the last over on TV. I was very disappointed. I never knew how the match ended until years later, when I found out that he actually got the runs, because I was amazed years later when he actually got the runs. He remained a bachelor his whole life. Like all his brothers and sisters, he kept his house neat and clean. He dressed in typical fashion like his brothers, and we have some photos of him in hospital in his older age, where he was on kidney dialysis, but he chose to go off that and died about 5 days later, Mum told me. We stayed with Uncle Peter a number of times during the 1980s. He was, of course, a Catholic, and would have gone to church regularly. There was a regular family gathering, which I've talked about before, of many of the Daly brothers and possibly sisters, probably sisters, sometime in the 1980s, where we all got together. Now, I don't think everyone quite was there, just about maybe, but I'm not sure Philomena was there. I can't remember for sure, but a lot of the uncles and aunts, a lot of the uncles were there. Peter was and that was at Peter's house. Peter was a courteous and respectful man, a little bit strict I found him personally, but probably just a little bit, he had a little foibles of an older man who's single, I think, more than anything else, was all it was about Uncle Peter. Very regular in most ways. There was nothing really peculiar about him. Like Kevin and Pat, he was sane, sensible and rational, and knew well enough how to organise his life and pay his bills and keep his home, as all the Daly brothers and sisters knew how to do. They knew how to live a regular life and take care of themselves. They had all the standard things which people have, like, clothes and the furnishings and the kitchen equipment and all that stuff. They were just regular people, as we still are regular people. Generally, he was pretty much an upstanding, responsible citizen. Peter worked for a newspaper, among things it might have been the Sydney Morning Herald. He cooked for the Morris brothers, and he had a long-term girlfriend actually, who was a nurse who he went to for dinner on occasions. He actually inherited the house in Paddington from his grandfather on his mother's side, Duncan MacLean, his maternal grandfather. He looked after Christina MacLean, his aunt, who was his mother's younger sister, and until she went into a nursing home in Darlinghurst. He was a member of the Waverley Historical Society. I think it was the Waverley Historical Society, but he was a member of the Historical Society. And a lot of the furniture that he inherited in the house was from from his grandfather's family. That was already in the house. He would have likely gone to church every week because the whole family's faithful. And like Dad and Uncle Kevin, he shaved regularly. And yeah, that's a bit of information on Peter. Now Frank Daly, that's another of the boys, Frank was in the army. He married Nina, but she was called Molly. Who's Nina's brother actually lived in Cooma North, and Nina's brother's daughter worked in the hairdressers of Khartoum's hairdressers in Cooma, and Mum knew her. He lived on the Princess Highway in the Cogra area, sort of the St. George area, somewhere around there. He was a barber, according to Mum, and at one stage, his children were Peter, Paul, and another boy. We have those details. One of his sons had a boy called Matthew, and my old brother was Matthew as well. He was a friendly enough fella from memory. He was actually quite courteous and friendly and upbeat. I think one thing about Frank was there was a bit of passion in him. He liked boats, according to Mum, and as Beryl Wilson, a friend of Mum's, knew him, he most likely drove a car and had a license. I think nearly all of them probably had a license, but I'm not sure if Peter drove, because we can't remember if Peter actually drove a car, and Molly might not have driven a car. We don't know for sure on that. Now, Stan lived at Caringbah and married Shirley. He joined the RAF, actually, and not the army, during the war. They had 4 children: Kerry, Martin, Paula, and Colin. He was a builder, and he actually built their home in Caringbah, which I went to a few years back, where Shirley was still living. I think she might still be living, actually, Auntie Shirley. She's quite old now, and yeah, me and Mum and Christy and Greg and possibly James, maybe not James, went and visited Shirley, and we had a chat at that time. He was in the Casillo Catholic movement, and later on in life he would go to the Latin Mass, which he favoured. And his mother-in-law lived with him for a while. And yeah, Stan. Now Leo is Leo's the second oldest, I think, or is Leo the oldest? Leo and Vincent are the oldest too. I can't remember which. I think Vincent's the oldest, and then Leo. But Leo did a history degree in Melbourne and was a Morris brother. And his Morris brother's name was Brother Regis. Of course, he never married, and Mum recalls that he died on February the 10th at 10 minutes to midnight. And, Vincent married Margaret and had 2 boys called Leo and Vincent. And he died in his 20s. Mum tells me that Dad recalls that Vincent drank too much. And he worked as a lifesaver, according to Mum. Now, Vincent had Leo and Vincent, and one of them had a boy called Kevin. And we know Kevin. He lives in, I think, Orange County in California or something. I think that's where he lives in the USA, and works in a computing firm. And we know Kevin. He got in contact with us, did Kevin. And Kevin has a son called Gavin. So there you go. Now Brian went to Campbelltown Morris as a boarder for school. Because, yeah, he worked on the railway in Marulan. He married Audrey, and his children were Jeanette, Christine, Pamela, and Paul. He was very good at golf, Mum recalls. They went to live in Coffs Harbour, and he died up there later on in life. I remember they had a single reclining cedar couch which I used to sit on and push the knob up and down to raise the legs of the recliner up and down. The toilet was out the back, according to Mum's memory. Matthew got a dog from them called Sylvia, but they also had a dog of her own, but Miss Sylvia was from another thing. Okay, that's some basic details on Brian. Keith. Keith was a postman who was in the army. He married Kathleen Aldridge. They never had any children, and I think they married later on in life, whatever that means. They lived in Ryde. He owned I remember one thing that they had was a plastic cereal box, which was on the table that they had, which they had their cereal in. I just remember that for some strange reason. And I remember there was a telephone which was on, and we pledged money to it when we were staying there once. He had a single couch on the back veranda. I think it was under the house, which was on stilts or something. It was raised or something. I'm pretty sure it wasn't on the veranda, it was under the house, but Mum thinks it was on the back veranda. So there's confusion in memories, but I'm pretty sure it was a house which was on the back veranda. I used to sit on it and look at the garden. It was a beautiful back garden, and Mum says it had grapefruits and oranges. Really attractive garden in a nice part of Sydney. He was possibly involved with the St. Vincent Paul Society, according to Mum, but we don't know for sure. He drove for Meals on Wheels and did delivery for them, and obviously had a license, but Mum says he never wore a seatbelt. And I remember that he actually gave me a postman's hat when I was young. I've still got pictures of me in that postman's hat. Now, Molly. Molly's the oldest girl, and she married Joe Modafferi and had Philip. She wore clip-on earrings, I particularly remember that. She lived in various places, including Bondi Junction and Maroubra, and she had a house with her sister Philomena for a while. She owned a TV because she'd watch TV, and she cooked for herself and knew how to take care of herself. She was in a retirement home in Randwick when she died, and we visited her just before her death. She would visit us a bit, and we would visit her. And finally, Philomena. Philomena married Ted Henderson. She's the youngest, was Philomena. She had a girl called Sharon. She smoked. I do remember when I finally met her, I never really knew Auntie Philomena, but when I met her once, that she did smoke, or it was talked about. She worked as in a dry cleaners with Molly at one stage, and of course she's the youngest. So that's just a bit more information on the Daly family.